Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore's quarterly webinar Spring Update. My name is Patrick Dougherty. I'm the Research and Business Development Associate here at the Economic Alliance, and I'm joined today by Andrew Coy of the Digital Harbor Foundation. And we'll be going through the Regional Economic Update that we just put out, and then the Education Technology Index, and we'll talk a little bit about the education technology industry here in Greater Baltimore. So first up is the Quarterly Economic Update, which is our attempt to benchmark Greater Baltimore, sort of take stock and track our progress amongst the 25 largest U.S. metros with headlines, rankings, and various statistical measures. By the way, can everybody hear me? Just making sure. Okay. All right, good. Well, the first thing we want to talk about is population and growth. And as you can see, Baltimore is on the smaller side of the largest 25 metros, and it's kind of a slow grower, but that's true of most mid-Atlantic, Northeast metropolitan areas because those are the oldest, most established, and most built out. But 2012 was a good year for Baltimore City. It was the first time in 6 decades that Baltimore City's population increased. So there's a plus there, and you can see that Baltimore is the 3rd fastest growing region in the Mid-Atlantic area. Greater Baltimore is an incredibly highly educated area, 8th highest percentage of bachelor's degrees and 4th highest percentage of graduate degrees. And you can see that our neighbor is number 1 in both of those metrics. And when you combine the two, you really end up with the most educated corridor in the country. And the Baltimore Central Maryland marks there really demonstrate that. Unemployment from February 2012 to February 2013, it decreased in that time, but it's still not what we were hoping or what we would like to see, really. Last quarter, we were down in the 6% range, and there was a slight increase from that, which is sort of typical in the early months of the year as temporary seasonal workers are laid off, but it's worth monitoring whether that's just based on a seasonal shift or whether that's telling of a weakness in the job market. Greater Baltimore has focused for the last decade on professional and technical services, healthcare, and biohealth, all of which have been resilient and growing industries, and that's helped keep our unemployment rate well below the U.S. average. And the federal government presence in the area hasn't hurt that measure either. Employment has grown in the last year. If you were here for the last webinar, you might remember that Greater Baltimore was the 25th fastest growing metro, so it was down at the bottom of the list with less than 1% growth. So it's good to see that the last year has shown over 2% growth. And over on the right-hand side, you can see that in the past decade, we've been one of the 10 fastest growing in terms of employment metros in the country. And you'll notice that those 10 are also some of the least affected metros during the housing crisis and the subsequent recession in Texas, and then strong tech metros and Greater Baltimore and Washington, D.C., with the presence of the federal government there. And these sectors on the left-hand side are the ones that have been driving that 2.35% growth in the past year. Professional, scientific, and technical services is up there. So is healthcare and social services, which are ones that we like to see on the positive side, being high-wage, high-growth industries. A lot of the other ones up there, like administrative support, mining and logging, and leisure and hospitality, are trend-driven and dependent on a stronger economy overall. So we might not want to put too much stock into those being continual drivers of growth from here on out. On the right-hand side, in the past decade, you can see that some of them were on the lower side and even in the negatives for retail trade and mining, logging, and construction. And that was due to a dip in the economy during that decade and just the cyclical nature of those industries. Greater Baltimore is home to some very highly concentrated industries. Federal government is one. I'm seeing them there at almost 2 times what you would expect, or 2 times the national average in employment concentration for federal government employees really underscores the importance of federal money and jobs to the region. Education services, professional, scientific, and technical services, and healthcare are all there with a very high concentration. And those are all, like we said, fast-growing, high-wage, and stable industries. So it's a good sign for the future growth of Baltimore. Professional, scientific, and technical services can be used to measure the health and growth potential of the economy. So we like to see Greater Baltimore ranked 6th on the concentration of PST services. More on professional, scientific, and technical, Greater Baltimore has grown almost by 5% in the last year, which puts us in the top 5 in the country, and by almost 30% over the last decade. And we're in company there with a lot of good, strong, growing metros like San Francisco and Dallas that have really seen a boom in the last 5 or 10 years. Greater Baltimore is also one of the wealthiest metros in the country based on household income and per capita income. And the high wages in the industry are driven by some federal government work, but mostly in IT, bio, and professional, scientific, and technical services. We've also seen in the last 10 years almost 40% growth in per capita income, which is a positive for the region. Foreclosures in March of 2012 September of 2012. The charts, the table is mislabeled. September of 2012 saw a little bit of a spike in foreclosures in Greater Baltimore, and by a little bit of a spike, I mean almost 2% or a little over 2%. And that could be for a couple of reasons. One is that Maryland was very affected by the robo-signing procedures and the issues that came along with that. And a lot of the homes that would have normally been in foreclosure, the process was stopped and a shadow inventory was built up in banks. And as they were all released and kept going through the foreclosure process and hitting the market, they then officially became foreclosed homes. So that put a lot of homes into this rate that would not have otherwise been there all at the same time before. Maryland is also a judicial foreclosure state, meaning that there's an extended period of time in which the person being foreclosed on can take their home or take the bank to court to try and extend the foreclosure process, which a lot of times puts the homeowner further into debt, leaving homes on the market longer, bumping up the percentage of foreclosed homes a little bit further. And there's also a little bit of contraction in the region due to the sequestration and fiscal cliff fears, and that would explain a similar but smaller bump in DC that you can see on the graph on the right. Greater Baltimore home prices, or the home prices across the country, are improving, and they're a little bit down in Greater Baltimore over the past 3 years, but they're up in the past year, and there have been a lot of reports of bidding wars for homes in Baltimore because inventory is particularly low, and a lot of people are waiting to sell their homes, and so people who are on the market to buy are really snatching them up as quickly as they can. So for good homes, good single-family homes in desirable areas, home prices are actually increasing, and they are actually increasing in most counties around Greater Baltimore as well. Venture capital is not yet a strong point in Greater Baltimore, and we would like to see that improve. Virginia tends to capture a lot of the venture capital in IT services, but there's a lot of additional funding sources in the region. Crowdfunding and angels are everywhere, but we also have the federal government, and contracting opportunities that come along with that are not as common across the country. There is a slight delay in PricewaterhouseCoopers reporting that causes some incomplete data. So the jumps in $40 million in biotechnology in the fourth quarter, and there was a $100 million jump in total venture capital awarded in the DC Metroplex in the fourth quarter. And those might even be smaller than what we'll find out in the first quarter of 2013 actually occurred in the region. Greater Baltimore is consistently ranked among the top metros in the country. The most post-industrial metros in the top left-hand corner is a measure of metropolitan area's ability to transition from a transition to a service-producing economy from a goods-producing economy. And that ranking is based on the ratio of goods to services produced. Greater Baltimore produces almost 6 services for every 1 good, and Washington, D.C. nearly doubles that with a ratio of 11-1. On the right-hand side, in the top corner, you can see that Maryland is again, the top state for education for the 5th year in a row. And also recently, Fast Company ranked Maryland the 3rd most innovative state behind Florida and Texas, which is actually not on these charts right here. This is just a sampling of some of the top headlines that have come out of Greater Baltimore in the last quarter. A couple of them are about cybersecurity, like iWebGate and 2 other companies joining the SYNC program, which is a partnership between Northrop Grumman and UMBC at UMBC's BW Tech Park campus. And the Maryland legislature approving the cybersecurity investment incentive tax credit portends well for continued growth and hopes to attract some cybersecurity investment from outside the region and help the small businesses based in cybersecurity here grow. Now we're on to education technology in Greater Baltimore. And education technology is a newly emerging industry without very much in the way of statistics or employment records to describe its growth and its projected and potential future. So this report is an attempt to measure which regions are best positioned to sort of take hold of the economy of the industry and become a hub for innovation, entrepreneurship, investment, and industry growth. And Andrew Coy is here to help us give a little bit of practical experience behind it, maybe put some of these figures into a way that's, I don't know, a little bit more real world, something to make it jump off the page a little bit. If anybody has any questions, feel free, of course, to type them in. We'll answer them as quickly as possible. And Andrew, feel free to jump in anytime and share your knowledge.
Thanks, Patrick.
What is education technology is a question that a lot of people struggle with. Education technology is both an industry and it's the products being used in the classroom. And really, it's a variety of tools that advance and enhance student learning. Some of the examples are listed below: software and hardware, models, techniques, machines, some organizational techniques. Things like the calculator were one time considered education technology, but now there's a big groundswell of it around the mobile platforms that are becoming available, iPhones and iPads especially. And it's a way to gain practical, real-world experience in the classroom. You can run business simulations, you can do chemical modeling or any other type of engineering modeling that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do because of cost limitations. And it's really the intersection of education and technology, just like what it sounds like.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add kind of one comment to that, which is that the education system has remained almost entirely unchanged in the past 100 years. And currently it's going through, and you'll see in the next 5 to 10 years, a major disruption of what that looks like. Education technology is one of the driving factors behind what that change is. And so being able to solve some of those hard problems currently and roll them out is a great position to be in as a market.
There's some major national trends, and like I said, education technology being sort of a new area doesn't have a lot of the numbers that maybe IT or biohealth does to sort of back it up or quantify what's going on. But from the second quarter of 2011 to the second quarter of 2012, EdTech companies received $1.37 billion in funding. And there's been a real continued growth of venture capital in the education technology space, and it only looks like it's going to go upwards from here. The education technology market was worth almost $8 billion in 2011, and there's been a push towards personalized education and one-to-one classrooms where every student has a device and every student can use that device to learn their way. Maryland has the best education system, public education system, for 5 consecutive years, as we talked about before. And some of the venture capital investors in education technology are located right here in Greater Baltimore. The region is home to some long-standing leaders in the industry, Sylvan or Educate Inc. and Laureate. Greater Baltimore is a great beta site because it's got a really varied geographic, economic, and demographic landscape. You can hit some really great schools and some schools that maybe might look to technology for a little bit of assistance. Business incubation services are available everywhere, or very available at least. The region takes in far fewer venture funds, which could hold it back.
And one other comment that I would add here, a local fact that's really important, is the proximity to Washington, D.C. and the national conversation going on around education. We're so close to some of those decision makers that they can come up and see what's going on, but yet we're not in D.C. and kind of been swallowed up by a lot of the politics that go on there.
And Andrew brought up a really good point. Here you can see what's technically considered the Baltimore MSA and then the Washington, D.C. MSA. But right there in the yellow is the suburbs of the D.C. metropolitan area that are located in Maryland. And like he said, we're very close to D.C. and we're very close to legislators. And that also means that we're very close to the enormous labor market that's in D.C. Commuting patterns in the area show a very fluid movement of labor throughout the Baltimore-Washington corridor. People are leaving Greater Baltimore to work in the DC suburbs or into DC proper, and people are leaving the DC suburbs to work in Greater Baltimore. The Combined Statistical Area is an easily accessed large hub of economic activity. The transportation options simply underscore how accessible the area is. There's the 95 corridor running right through it, the Amtrak, the MARC train that is a commuter rail. There's a Baltimore Metro subway, 3 major airports, and a light rail. And it makes it really easy to get around Baltimore and really easy to get around the whole corridor. So here's where Baltimore ranks on our on the list of 10 indicators that we've chosen to represent education technology potential. And First couple of things that jump out at you is that Baltimore is the best metro for public education. It's even possible that the public education and the private schools here are so good that it's reduced demand for charter schools, and that's why the charter school rank is much lower than anything else. There's a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem indicators. There's a number of incubators, a number of fast-growing companies in IT and education. But the region does struggle to capture venture capital. But the education technology investors here in Baltimore give us some hope that companies in the region will be able to capture those funds, and they won't have to go anywhere. They won't have to go elsewhere. The universities in the region are recognized for their STEM programs, and they're strong in STEM, cyber, IT. Despite us not having nearly as many universities per capita as potentially some other areas. Washington, D.C. is also way up there on the education scorecard. They rank number 2 right behind Baltimore, so together we have the corridor really has the best public education available in the country. Washington, D.C. also has a little bit of a lack of venture capital, but there are a lot of incubators and many fast-growing companies, so it's possible certainly to move past that. It's one of the strongest IT markets in the country. There's more fast-growing IT companies and a higher concentration of IT workers than anywhere else. A lot of that's driven from federal work, but that does mean that there's a lot of skill and ability in the region. It's dense with universities and charter schools. It's the most educated metro in the country. And there's certainly a strong pipeline for human capital. So here's the final index before we get into all of the indicators. Baltimore ranks 3rd, and the Baltimore-Washington CSA is right above that, as you can see. Washington, D.C. ranks 2nd overall. Boston's at the top. And the one thing you'll notice about all of these metros together is that there's a strong education base running throughout them. And there's a lot of available innovation capital. Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego all seem to get a lot of venture capital. Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, a little bit lower down on the list, but certainly do grab a share of venture funds. These all have an existing reputation as entrepreneurial hotspots, and they all have an existing entrepreneurial ecosystem that's been lauded and people say is primed for growth. And there's a high concentration of IT workers and an above average number of fast-growing education companies in each of them. So here's a whole list of all of the indicators that we used and the weights that we assign them. As you can see, no one thing was really valued that much more than the others. The highest valued was the number of venture capital deals, but the innovation indicators measure an ability to generate actionable ideas. The talent indicators measure the region's ability in education and technology fields, and the pipeline is a measure of each region's ability to prepare current students for a knowledge-based innovation economy. The incubators per capita is one where Baltimore ranks highly. Incubators speed the growth of startups and small companies, and having a lot of them implies that a startup community is focused on growth and success. And it indicates a demand for specialized business assistance and really shows a desire for growth. Venture capital deals is the number of deals available for venture capital dollars in a region, and it sends a message to other entrepreneurs that the region offers more funding opportunities than possibly somewhere else. It's a measure of innovation activity rather than value of a single idea. And there's a note here that some of them are tied with Portland and Seattle both being 4, LA and Riverside and San Diego all being jumped together, and Baltimore and Washington together. PricewaterhouseCoopers provides venture capital information for large regions, Texas, the DC Metroplex, separately. And there's no way to get dialed down metro-specific data. So these rankings are an approximation, use an approximation of those regions' population. Metros in the same PricewaterhouseCoopers region, like Portland and Seattle, will have the same per capita venture capital dollars. And then the dollars, separately from the deals, gives the average size of a venture capital deal and they do help send a message to attract entrepreneurs. A large infusion of funds is no guarantee of success, but it does help extend the life of the recipient and gives good business plans a little bit more time and a little bit more money to grow a market and make their business work.
Well, if I can add something here on this point, this is really important, especially in education, because of the long sales cycles. Typically, schools operate on a fiscal budget that means that you need to get in a budget item that has to be approved and then the payout. So having venture capital dollars is something that's very important and something that here in Baltimore we could do a lot better focusing on developing that.
The talent indicators start with these IT occupations. Economic Alliance of Greater Baltimore selected 13 IT-specific industries to quantify the labor market in IT. This here provides a measure of the density or the size of a skilled workforce in a region. And there are significant advantages to density, like idea sharing. Baltimore ranks 10th here, Washington, D.C.'s first, and when you put them together with that really fluid labor market that we saw, it would come in right about 3rd. Education professionals are people who work in schools, private schools, charter schools, and again, there are advantages to density with this, where people can kind of bump into one another, share ideas, and I know there have been companies such as a lesson plan sharing company that's been formed simply through teachers sharing ideas and saying they needed help with things. So having a lot of education professionals or having a density of education professionals can improve classroom practices and teaching efficiency. The Inc. 5000 provides a list of the fastest growing companies in the United States, and 75 of those companies were in 75 of those companies were in education. So having a lot of companies on this list, or having a lot of more companies than somewhere else, indicates a healthy startup culture capable of facilitating growth in a number of industries, specifically for this list, education industries. The ones at the top not only are able to sort of feed those education startups, but they also have to have an interest in those education startups to begin with. And after you see a little bit of growth, you hope to see education technology spinoffs, which is really only possible if you have those startup companies growing and succeeding every day. The IT companies, so it kind of touches on the technology portion of education technology. And this measures the tech-focused entrepreneurial activity in the metro. It's sort of a barometer for the existing entrepreneurial ecosystem. Fast Company rates Maryland the fourth with the most startups per 1 million residents. And as you can see here, that's reflected in the Inc. 5000. Two totally different measures, but they reach the same conclusion. Baltimore and Maryland have a lot of startups. Quick note about the Inc. 5000. There's a little bit of fluidity to it. It's updated regularly or maybe even continuously. This ranking and the one before it reflects the data gathered in February and March of this year. A pipeline of human capital and talent is very important to any industry, and the same is true, obviously, for education. Human capital is key in innovation ecosystems, and education is an important driver of success. Education Week provides state rankings, but these are adjusted to metropolitan areas using a weighted average of population of each metro based on which states contribute to the metro. Something like Chicago has some residents from Indiana or Wisconsin coming in. So Chicago's is slightly different than Illinois. Baltimore, because everyone in the greater Baltimore MSA is from Maryland, so Baltimore receives the same ranking as Maryland, number 1. Like we said, Baltimore does not have as many universities per capita as some other places, but the ones that we do have are STEM focused and many are nationally acclaimed. Universities help create a skilled labor force and people with a lot of professional expertise, and they provide the ability to integrate technology into classrooms and curriculums maybe easier than a normal public high school. Educators and students can learn education technology skills and innovate based on their experiences with technology in university classrooms. Charter schools are actually public, but they're not reflected in the Education Week rankings. But they do manage their own curriculum. So charter schools have the opportunity to introduce STEM disciplines and in earlier and in specialized ways. Greater Baltimore ranks 20th. The Baltimore-Washington CSA would rank about 15th or so. Washington's much higher up on the list at 11th. But like we said, there is sort of a lessened demand for charter schools in the greater Baltimore area because the public schools and the private schools in greater Baltimore are as strong as they are. So looking ahead, how can we improve education technology? It's going to take innovative partnerships and collaborations. Things like education hackathons, where technologists and educators have the potential to meet one another and share ideas, are important. And groups like the Digital Harbor Foundation and other public-private partnerships that help educate students or commercialize ideas and provide some funding are important as well. We need to remain on the forefront of education. That includes maintaining the very high level of education in the region, but it also means integrating technology into classrooms from elementary school on up. And giving the students opportunity to work with and learn technology skills earlier on and become really proficient in them and possibly make the next big thing later. We should take advantage of local venture capitalists with interest in education technology. Those are a lot of dollars that we would like to keep in the region, and we certainly have the ability to do so. And we need to leverage the industry leaders here in Greater Baltimore. Like we said, Sylvan and Laureate are both local to the area, And it's important to sort of get them connected with startups and help people share ideas that way. Does anybody have any questions about either of the two papers that we've discussed? If not, then I'll turn it over to Andrew Coy, and he can tell us a little bit about the Digital Harbor Foundation.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. So the Digital Harbor Foundation is a nonprofit public charity that's focused on innovation, tech advancement, and entrepreneurship. And we accomplish our mission through inquiry-based after-school student programming. And this last January, we actually launched the Digital Harbor Foundation Tech Center, which was created by repurposing one of the city's rec centers that the mayor had slated to close. And so out of that space, there's daily programming for students where they're learning tech workforce skills. There's also meetups and events for the larger EdTech community in the evening. Through all of our different experiences, we've actually created partnerships with national organizations such as Battelle, which many of you might know from their research and development work. They're actually a $6.9 billion nonprofit that does a lot of R&D in STEM-related fields. And they give back and they focus some of their efforts on creating the next generation of STEM professionals. And in partnership with them, we've created a Common Core aligned STEM curriculum we call STEM Core that's focused on helping students across the country develop and learn these skills. And it's what we're doing right here with our own students and with our own after-school program at the Digital Harbor Foundation Tech Center. So such topics that we're interested and focused on in growth industries that we see continued need for web development and mobile app development, and as well as future jobs in digital fabrication or 3D printing and rapid prototyping. We also see a huge demand here in the region for cybersecurity, and yet a substantial shortage of trained professionals, and starting that pipeline much earlier. There's some great universities such as UMBC and what they do to prepare college-age students for those careers, but we need and we want to see more high school-age students putting themselves on that pathway, knowing about those job opportunities, so that they're then going into those high performing programs.
Craig has a question about venture capital in Maryland. Are any of the state programs generating interest from venture capitalists? That's hard to say. I know Invest Maryland invests in companies itself, so it doesn't necessarily and that Invest Maryland program is handled by some venture capitalists, so it sort of creates some connections maybe, and it might help publicize good companies and give them a little bit of a bonus on their resume when they go to talk to a venture capitalist, so to speak. But as far as improving venture capital investments in the area, the first thing we can do is really improve the image of the region as an entrepreneurial area. San Francisco Valley has a reputation for investment-ready companies, and we sort of need to bring that idea back to Baltimore. A lot of the venture capital that makes its way to the region is from outside of Maryland, and a lot of the venture capitalists based here in Greater Baltimore end up investing outside the area. So we can really, there's a lot of dollars floating around, or floating from Greater Baltimore outside that we can take advantage of. It's just a matter of getting the companies that are worthy out there, and a lot of them are biohealth based, which provides a little bit of a increased difficulty with there being a valley of death gap, and they need a lot more money. So the ones that are here might not be biohealth investors, or they might not be willing to put down the money that is needed to go from a conceptual stage to a testing or to a commercialization stage. So I guess to answer your question, it's improving the image, but also helping people make connections around the area, because there is money here. It's just a matter of getting it to stay here rather than having it leave us.
Well, and kind of one way that I would propose that we go about doing this is really connecting some of the big successes that have come out of Baltimore and the education market in Baltimore with some of the entrepreneurs and the innovators that are developing solutions to current problems. So for example, if anybody has read Tom Vander Ark's, who is the former executive director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation over education, his recent piece on Baltimore, as he was doing a survey of cities across the country, he really looked at and said that you have innovation going on and you have the successful companies, and by connecting those two more closely, some of the venture capital dollars could actually come from those companies and spur increased and expanded growth in the entrepreneurship and the innovation.
So Craig, I hope that is a satisfactory answer to your question. Andrew, where do you see Baltimore as being ahead of the curve in education technology?
A lot of people who have seen and come and visited Baltimore and have talked with us really want the kind of cutting edge education technology focused on technology education. So let me kind of break that down a little bit more. There's a shortage nationally of STEM professionals. There's a lot of STEM programs, and STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. But a lot of those programs lack substantially in the technology component. They do well with science and to a lesser degree with engineering, and then do pretty well with math. But the technology is really absent. And so people that come and look at what we're doing, for example, at the Digital Harbor Foundation, are saying, we need to mimic and adopt some of these technology curriculums that you have developed. And so as a region, innovating in the technology sector, I think, is one of our great strengths. And we have so many jobs here in Maryland. For example, in cybersecurity alone, there was a recent study that highlighted 19,000 unfilled jobs. So I feel like it's a double return if we continue to focus and improve our ability to train students for those technology opportunities, and that's what people are coming here to see how we're doing.
The Economic Alliance accompanied Andrew and a few other members of the Digital Harbor Foundation out to South by Southwest EDU in Austin. And there I heard it mentioned that there was a need for communication between educators and technologists, sort of to make sure that these entrepreneurs are solving problems that actually exist and not just ones that sort of exist in their head. Do you see communication in this region being a strength or a weakness?
It's definitely a strength, and it's something that over the past year and a half, about 2 years ago, another educator and myself started the Baltimore EdTech Forum, and we had speakers come, entrepreneurs such as Dave Troy. We had Dr. Alonzo from the school district. We had very cross-sector and focused on specific areas as well, with some of the meetups being around special education or around entrepreneurship and education. And that has morphed into the EdTech meetups, which is a couple hundred strong regular meetups. We had about 75 people out on this last Monday night with a speaker from Ohio that came out to talk about gamification in education. And those are going on monthly. And if you're an educator or if you're a technologist, there's a platform and a place for that conversation to be happening. And there's not enough of those conversations nationally. So we really do stand out as one that are focusing on developing those relationships.
I should bring up now that a lot of the things that Andrew is covering are sort of things that are unquantified or maybe even unquantifiable in this index. The education technology meetups, so some of the valuable network assets that Greater Baltimore has really aren't in this index. And so us being third, and then you add in some of the things like the stalwarts in the region, those EdTech meetups, people sharing ideas, the level of communication that we have, it really helps to improve our overall sort of standing and potential for education technology.
Well, and I think one area that we need to focus on is at the ground level. There's a really a groundswelling, a grassroots kind of teachers and technologists getting together, and I think kind of moving up the chain there and talking about connecting the dots at higher level, which is where something like this report can really help galvanize the community and the industry leaders that may not be as directly involved in day-to-day education or technology to really start getting involved in kind of filling in some of the gaps, especially in the venture capital side or in some of the experienced business side, to provide mentorship for some of these new startups where teachers who have come out of the classroom are wanting to solve some of the problems that they saw in the classroom but don't have the business background. So there's a need going up the food chain to talk to some of the higher level industry folks and get everyone around the table on the same page.
So sort of the other side of that coin, Andrew, are there any areas that the region needs to focus on to help strengthen our position in education technology?
I mean, I really do think that having a more closely knit conversation around publicizing our strengths and showcasing what we've done to really celebrate some of the successes and to celebrate the opportunities for individuals who want to be successful to come here. Because so often people associate negative aspects of Baltimore when you're talking about Baltimore as a region. And I think really showcasing and publicizing the innovation and the entrepreneurship and the tech advancement both in the inner city as well as in the county and the region around, will really kind of draw and attract people to Baltimore. The thing about the inner city that I feel really strongly about personally is by solving some of the most difficult problems that we face in the inner city, we are able to demonstrate to a national audience how to solve problems that exist all across the country. And every single challenge and struggle is really simply an opportunity the ability then to solve a problem that not just Baltimore has, but two dozen other cities of similar size around the country are facing. So we're uniquely positioned, as Patrick had highlighted earlier, with a wide range of schools in a very close proximity that are able to showcase the effectiveness of these new technologies, new techniques, new approaches, and then to export those elsewhere as solutions to problems that other people have as well.
Does anybody have any questions for Andrew? We do have one coming in. Oh, maybe we don't. Kent says no, thank you. Looking forward to learning more. So that will conclude our webinar. On the right-hand side of the screen, there are the two documents that we discussed today: our regional economic update and our education technology index, available for download. They will also be on our website, available if not now, then very shortly. And I hope everyone gets a chance to read them. Love to hear your feedback, and I'd love to hear that you've been passing the information along. So thank you, Andrew.
Yep, thank you, Patrick.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us.